Yeah, so what I'm presenting here is an overview of a project that was conducted, well, it's still ongoing to be honest, with myself, a former student, some of you might recognise, Matty Jenkins, who started this project around mental health in professional football, but a slight twist on perhaps some of the stuff that you've seen. So no doubt, if you're across some of the sports media and things, you will have seen in recent years quite a lot of attention given to mental health within professional football. But one thing that Matty picked up on was how a lot of the debate around depression in football was sort of framed it as a real contemporary issue, something that is happened in the last 10 years. So his idea, which we've carried on running with, we've got another interview actually on Thursday, is to try and look at players who played in the 1980s, 1990s, and ask some of the same questions around mental health that's been asked in the literature, and see whether actually we can add some sort of developmental analysis to what's going on in the literature. So you can see that the 6 players that we've got so far, he put a threshold on it of 250 appearances to try and get players who've sort of got experience within professional football. Our aim now is a little bit more purposive, so we're trying to get more players who are 40s, 50s, so that we get that developmental analysis. I'm just going to present the findings that we've got so far today. So the first thing to point out really is that the way that we frame this is professional football as a job. And I know we don't often think about elite sport in that way, but it is a job. So the first set of questions really were around trying to understand what it's like to work as a professional footballer. I'm going to read out these quotes. There's a lot of text on the slides. I'll not jump to them all, and I've tried to highlight the important words, the themes that we picked out. As you'd expect, some sort of highs and lows, but here's participant 6 talking about his experiences, saying, I've had 4 years not playing, and every year that goes past not playing, I remember it a little bit more fondly. So I think the nice aspect is, oh, it was brilliant, it was great, you kick the ball out in the morning, it was training, it was football, and then I take myself out, drop myself into certain points through my career. You're stressed, it was tough. I was going to say depressing, sometimes we use the word depressing. Now, I don't think at any stage I was depressed, but if you ask me outside of this interview, I didn't like it. It was horrible. And that was through periods of not playing well, periods of playing well, not being in the team, periods of being injured, periods of long-term injury, periods of successive injuries, periods of playing and doing really well, but spending more time popping sleeping tablets, stuff like that, than actually enjoying it. He carries on, you could do everything right and still lose, talking about football. You could do everything right and constantly lose. That creates stress and pressure. You could be in an environment where, and I've been there, where one person doesn't really like you, either personally or professionally, and that person is the manager. Participant 5, who was sort of early 80s, his playing career, said it's very tough in many ways, in that each day is a test. And I guess if you see it as a challenge rather than a stress, it's the way you look at these things, isn't it? And I really enjoy playing and I enjoy training. I was lucky to be in clubs that had good camaraderie. Other participant 2, again, highlighting the highs and lows. It's an enjoyment, there's a fun factor to it, but it's a very pressured environment. A very pressured environment in terms of, 1, you're fighting for your career. 2nd, there's obviously injuries that come, and it's how you feed back from that once you've come over that injury. Lastly, you've got teammates in there who may be starting their career or coming to the end of their career, knowing full well that if they get relegated, they'll be struggling to pay the mortgages or feed the kids. And then also, just to highlight the highs, although these were fewer of these, screaming with your teammates, and you get that bond winning matches in front of 5,000 fans at Anfield, in front of the away end. I'd grown up a Liverpool fan in the 80s and 90s, and obviously back then they won everything. And to go there and beat them in the last minute was special for myself. Or my family was there. The fans were brilliant. The Chelsea won again. The same thing. The final whistle goes. You've got 20,000 running onto the pitch. The noise was tremendous, he says. So you've got that as, this is the environment within which these people are working. And the other way that this links to the employment literature is then the culture of the workplace and the management techniques that are then espoused by those within the game. So a couple of extracts now which are sort of talking about conversations between the managers and players. I'd say, I'm not happy, Gaffer. I'm not in the team. Is there an interest from any other clubs? He'd say no. Right, so I'm thinking. I say, you've no interest whatsoever? No. Right, so that's it then. I might as well go then. Yeah. Then you get up and you're about to leave. He'd say, do you think you should be in the team? Well, everybody thinks they should be in the team, he'd say. He'd stare out the window again, and you'd come out, and you could be in there probably 10 minutes, and you'd come out and think, I've just wasted 10 minutes of my life. He was a bully. He bullied players. Now he'd never get away with that. And I mean, he did bully players. If you weren't in his first 11, you got hammered. A bit more up to date, but this is a similar sort of scenario around management technique. Most of the lads went away on pre-season tour, and I was one of the only player. I was the only player left behind. He didn't even take me. When they went away for pre-season, I was just left at home with one of the fitness coaches, and I just going into the training, just doing things, trained with the kids when they were there. And when I got back, I was thinking, right, they're back. At least I'll be able to join back in with training and stuff like that. The first day back, the fitness coach came and said to me, you're in with me today. So I said, what? I'm not even allowed on the grass. And he just looked at me with a sorry, don't kill the messenger sort of thing. I lost my head. I went in there all guns blazing, turned into an argument. But by that point, I had no bridges to burn. So I just wanted to basically tell him he was out of order. I basically told him he shouldn't be doing what he was doing to me. I should be on the training ground. But actually, he turned to me and said, tell the PFA, if you want, I'll just lie about when they ask me about it. I'll leave that one, because then the other thing that I wanted to touch upon, as well as sort of the culture and the management techniques that comes with elite sport and professional football is one of them, is then the uncertainty of that as an employment. And I know that's merged into wider society with short-term contracts, 0-hour contracts, but this is a really good example of that uncertainty. I'll talk about contracts in the biggest one with uncertainty for elite sport is injuries. So when asking about what's tough, then when you're missing match days through injuries and you lose your position, the worry kicks in. Am I going to get back in? You know, real clear link to mental health. What were your least enjoyable times? We asked participant one. Probably when you're out the team and you're injured. Do you know what I mean? This was actually a season when they got promoted, but he says at the end there, I didn't feel part of it, although I'd done my fair share because he got injured. So that sense of belonging didn't actually feel part of the team when he was injured. Participant 2 says the tipping point was where I actually did my knee. I got diagnosed with tendinitis, given 6 weeks off, doing nothing for 6 weeks. As you can imagine, every day on the motorway was a ball ache to be in the gym. The problem that we had is the gym was like a room with glass windows overlooking the training pitch. So every morning you're in the gym and the lads are going out onto the training pitch, and you're watching training from the gym. 6 weeks went by, I had a dry needle injection, it tore my tendon in two, and that's kind of where the restructuring started. The surgeon said, look, you might not play again. And then a little bit around, obviously, the competitive environment, you're not always in the team. So here's participant 1 saying, I signed in September, bought my house about January time, moved in, and then the start of the following season, I was out the team. I wasn't picked for the first game of the season. It was like, I'm going back to sit in this big empty house, or we'd have a first team game on a Tuesday night and I might be sub. I'd be going back to the house and all the lads are off there. I'm playing in the reserves. The next night you could be away somewhere and you just think, and at times you just sit there and you think. There was a little bit around fans because as an employment scenario, there aren't many situations where you have this relationship with such a large number of supporters. So there's a positive of that, which participant 2 talks about. One of the biggest feedback I got from my career was winning Player of the Year and Players Player of the Year in one season. It's probably the biggest honour you can get from a football club. And he's talking about how the fans are always there and how good his relationship was. But then on the other side of it, participant 4, I knew they were good players, but those players, along with myself, were not doing great. But the players that the manager signed at the time got the brunt of it from the fans, and I was one of them. There were 3 or 4 of us that were getting kind of a hell of a lot of abuse. The fans weren't happy with all of us. They were expecting, the expectation was for us to absolutely smash the league, and that didn't happen. So after that season had ended, the fans were abusing me. I didn't help myself the last game of the season because I reacted a little bit, and they took it worse than I expected. And then I did sort of mention about contracts here. The participant 5 saying I never signed longer than a 2-year contract, and there were 2 reasons for this. Really sums up contract in football. One, I was never offered more than 2 years, and the other one was a positive, because every time new players came in or inflation went up, you could go in and renegotiate the contract. He says at the bottom, I saw it as a positive. It kept you on your toes. You know, where you were one bad tackle away from finishing. Not quite sure how he spins that into a positive, but it sort of does. So then to sort of sum up, I wanted to pin it back to sort of mental health, and we did really ask them about whether this came to impact on their mental health. So here's participant 1 talking about being left in the reserves, and actually he comes across the son of his manager 10 years down the line complaining about treatment, and he says to him, well, your dad tripped me, did that to me, do you know what I mean? And then I asked, do you think this affected you as a player? And he says it affects your life. When you're used to playing on Saturdays, then when you're not, that's when you've got to go fucking home and you're miserable, and it's just, he calls it shit. All I wanted to do was play football, and somebody's stopping you. There's always times that you play crap and you're out of the team, but when it's like that, it is crap. Participant 2 also added another dimension to the study because he was a captain, and he talked a lot about outside sources that were affecting footballing, what he calls footballing issues. Gambling, drinking was a big one, divorces, marriage split-ups, and stuff like that. Shall we say personal constraints which affected their performance on the pitch, but they didn't want to mention it to anyone. Sort of the masculinity bit coming through there. Talking that he's got to tell the manager because he'd just break down, this one player. There's been times where I've had individuals stay at mine for a couple of weeks just to get themselves back up and running. And he continues here. I've captained each club I've been at, and I've always been the go-toer, he calls it. If an individual's struggling with anything at home or at the club, they'd always come and see me and relate back to who I needed to. I've had so many conversations with individuals regarding home life, addictions, etc. But the big thing is, because the men, they can't show emotions. Again, it goes back to the environment of being in that dressing room. You know full well, if someone walks in here and says, look, I've lost so much money, that the lads will take the mickey out of them, and he turns it under banter. Participant 3. That is one of the huge things that I could sort of see people getting depressed and things like that over money. Because like when you've been used to living this kind of lifestyle, although he says it's not always the case, when you've been used to living a sort of extravagant lifestyle, and if the wage stops, you can't sustain that. Like it's very difficult to pick up another career that pays that kind of money. And of course, football's a short career, like most elite sport. And then finally, just to point out to sort of mental health and social media. A lot of pressure comes with it. A hell of a lot of pressure comes with that. And that's what people don't understand. That's why depression in football is rife, right through from the age of 20 all the way up. Having to deal with playing one week and not playing, going out and doing well, all over social media, how good you are the next week telling you you're crap. And young players read this on a regular basis. But back then, I didn't have that problem. Depression, he says, is on the way up in professional football, definitely from when I played. I'm just going to jump to the last little bit because I'm conscious I don't want to take up all the time around that. Because the final point was just how, when we spoke to footballers who played in the past, their perceptions of how the past was, even though they all talked about struggles with depression, they then said that the problem is depression's on the up because players are now softer or haven't got the mental toughness, which was a bizarre contradiction for me because all the players in the past spoke about having mental health problems. So I've termed this sort of the perception of the past, and you'll see what I mean from some of these quotes. Here's participant C. I mean, kids are wrapped up in cotton wool now. I work in school now, and teachers do more work than the students. Kids don't have to do anything now. When I was a kid, we had nothing. I had a football and a pair of boots. That's all I wanted to do. But it goes on, but kids get everything too easy now. Sorry, that was participant 1. Participant 6, society has softened over time. I think football softened over time. If you look at any industry, you look at Glasgow, where he was from as a city, I used to be a really hard city. I'm pretty sure there are a lot of other cities in the UK will say the same, that have that hard graft. Life was tough, it was hard, life was tough. So they are the values that instilled in people, and that filters through to people. But society's changed a little bit now. Participant 2, society's changed from when we were growing up into what it is now. Participant 4, talking of younger players, they're less resilient now as well. We were brought up in an era, you know, where it was tough and more of a military environment, where you were made to be tough, but now it's not. Now it's cotton wool, and so they can't cope when they go into professional environment. A lot of these kids. So just to conclude, then, some of the sort of takeaway points, like I say, it's still sort of going, but I'd say mental health of all the participants was under pressure because of their employment. And I think when you term it that way, you start to realise some of the strange elements of professional football. Age didn't seem to impact on their experiences of work and mental health, but it did in terms of the way that they perceived other people. Uncertainty, the culture and characteristics of elite sport, I don't think they're particularly different in football, around surveillance, extreme highs and lows, short-term contracts, certain management techniques played a central role in mental health. But then also this idea, which I think is sort of a theoretical one, of the projection into the past of our contemporary impressions. So looking back through rose-tinted glasses to try and understand how things were, perhaps explains some of the differences in people's views about mental health. And that's it from me.
Great stuff. Thanks so much, Chris. Really interesting to listen to that. So again, I'll just open up to questions from the floor. Do you have any immediate questions? So Jeff. Oh, sorry, Gareth. I'll get to you in a second. Jeff, you need to unmute yourself.
You know what? How many times? Sorry about that. Chris, thanks for that. It was really interesting. I'm really interested around the so what in terms of the structural, the organisational change that you can put in place. Because they always describe expected versus unexpected retirement and that career transition phase. And yet, organisations, governing bodies seem to have scant support for that transition, and you know, especially professional soccer pay lip service to the education in academies. So what can shift and what needs to be done, do you think?
Yeah, this is I go back and forth with this one, and I'll tell you why. So one of the things that I found from my wider research is sometimes the more networks that you put in place, they can have unintended consequences, and they can sometimes be a bit of the problem. So I'll give you an example. If players are trying to hide quite a lot from coaches and from managers, back to sort of the idea of life being a front stage, and so they act up to this sort of masculinity. If you then go putting in sports psychologists and life coaches and all these people, they just become another complexity that a player has to mask his actual self from. So in some respects, the answer often from governing bodies and stuff is, right, let's get a sports psychologist in there, let's get a life coach in there, but actually they can be part of the problem. So I think you have to be quite careful with that. And actually it is probably a culture shift that potentially brings about some of these problems. But then the other thing I would say, and this sounds really defeatist, I actually think that one of the main problems here is that elite sport is just not a very nice environment. It is inherently really competitive. It's very pressured. People are very irrational about it. You know, think about supporters and all these sorts of things. You look at social media. So somewhere along the line, I think you have to go, maybe it's just elite sport and the characteristics of elite sport that cause really big problems for these people. And I think sometimes if you perhaps started from that point, rather than trying to find some, elite sport can be a nice place to work. Well, for most people, it's just bloody tough.
Maybe it isn't, yeah. I always remember that 2004 programme, A Life After Football, that Alan Hansen fronted.
Yeah.
You know, fascinating. You know, 16 years later, it's probably worse.
Yeah.
Thanks, Chris.
Yeah.
Really good points. Thank you.
Stuff. Gareth, you had a question?
Yeah, just thank that was really interesting actually. But I was just wondering if you had it looked like from your participant pool there that you had some that were in the starting 11. You mentioned that you had a captain within your participants, and then some that sounded like they were struggling to get in the starting 11. I just wondered if you noticed any difference in their overall opinion and how they saw their kind of career between those different participants. So the ones that were making it in starting 11 and the pressures of people who weren't making it in starting 11.
I think actually they've all had periods where they've been in the team and been doing well, and they've all had periods where a new manager has come in, they've made a move, and and then they've ended up with that bit where they've been out of the team, and so the captain, he was at one club for a long time, and he did sort of have just one season, and it was a manager who came in who decided he wasn't going to be in the team, and he sort of suggested that's why the manager perhaps only lasted a season, because he was captain, fans' favourite, and he dropped him. So yeah, I think they'd all had those periods of, you know, every single one of them had periods where they'd had injury that cost them 3 months, and they went through that bit of going, am I going to get back in the team? You know, my contract's up at the end of the season. So in those situations, no, there wasn't really much of a difference, mainly because they'd all been through it. I think back to sort of the answer that I said to Jeff, it's just a characteristic of competitive elite sport that these things are going to happen to you.
That's great. Good stuff. Okay, we've got any further questions? Jan?
Thanks, Chris. Lovely, rich interviews.
Yeah, with ex-S sports coaching student.
It was Matty Jenkins, wasn't it?
Yeah.
What's he doing now?
He's still coaching.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's still coaching. He does academy at Hull, and he does a university side. I can't remember who it is now, as well.
Good. Are you still in touch with him?
Yeah. He's helping get some contacts and stuff. So yeah.
Good.
Nice lad.
He is a nice lad, and he's done really well with that. Did he do the interviews?
Yeah. So he did the first 3, which were his undergraduate, and then we reanalyzed the first 3, and then we conducted the 4th one together, and I did 5 and 6 so far.
Okay. Well done.
Good stuff.
I've got another student, Elia Duflux.
Oh yeah, he's emailed me today.
Has he?
Yeah.
I asked him if he was going to come to this, and he's analysed the fan behaviour at Stocksbridge.
Right. Yeah.
And the impact that has on the players.
Right.
Yeah. He might want to do something with you.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Got any last final questions for Chris? Okay, Chris, if I can't see any. So thanks so much, Chris.
Yes.
Really interesting talk. So just thank you both. So thanks, Chris and Gareth, for your talks this afternoon. Really interesting to listen to. So as always, we'll post these seminars online on YouTube within the coming days. So for those that weren't able to be with us today, can view those at a later date. Our next seminar will be on the 18th of May. We'll have talks from Steve Thompson and Laura Carey. So hopefully see everybody then. Okay, take care, everybody.
Thanks, Marcus.
Cheers, guys.
Cheers, Marcus.
Marcus, thank you.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye.